Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Paul Cartwright. Paul, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Good, Lewis. It's thank you for inviting me on. I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, all good. Wishing there was a little bit more sun in our lives at the moment. I always think winter's a bit. It almost feels like a bit of an endurance test sometimes that we just have to get through. With the dark night starting at 4 in the afternoon and it being freezing cold. But apart from that, yeah, all good.
Yeah, the winter arc is very much an endurance event for sure.
Isn't it?
I've never heard it put like that before. I like that.
Yeah, it's an endurance test. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, all good.
But as always on the podcast for 60 episodes that we've always asked, Paul, in your own words, what makes you a man?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think one of the things that makes me a man or the man I am today is definitely my upbringing. I was actually the only boy in 3 generations, so my nan had 5 daughters, one of which was my mom. They all then had daughters, so I had a lot of aunties and a lot of female cousins growing up. And I think if I look back now, I'm super grateful for that actually, because I think being surrounded by that female energy genuinely enabled me to be the man I am today. So there was a lot of times when you're taught that it's okay to cry, it's all right to talk about stuff. Maybe anger isn't the immediate go-to emotion that you access when stuff goes wrong. I think being surrounded by females from a very early age, as I say, I look back now, I'm really, really grateful for. I think that female energy really enabled me to grow and, as I say, be that man I am today. I think another few things that makes me a man is I've always had a level of empathy that I bring, hopefully, to everything that I do. My background, before I started, working in the men's personal development area, my background is in charity. So working as a fundraiser for many years. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to focus on making a difference. And I think having empathy for those that you are raising funds for has been really helpful in that job. But I think just generally in life, I think there's probably, especially at the moment, there seems to be a real tribal element to dialogue happening in the news, in society. And I think what we need is less judgment and more empathy. And also another thing I wrote down is what makes me a man is this lens through which I see the world, which is curiosity, again, related to not judgment, but more of curiosity, trying to understand more about what it is that's going on for people as opposed to instantly making a judgment. And as I say, especially at the moment, I think that's incredibly important. I think my work with and my help for other men makes me a man. I think that's a really important element of what I do. I think also what makes me a man is a level of humility. I think whilst I have incredible pride in what I do, I always think there's a level of humility that I carry with me, which I think really enables me to then connect with other people. When you put all of that together, that curiosity, that empathy, and that level of humility, I hope anyway that's what I bring. I think these are characteristics that really, for me, really tie into that sense of self as a man. And I think also a constant desire to be better. I think when I look back, I became an NLP trainer back in 2014. But alongside that, there's always been these things that I've been doing or areas that I've been looking to improve on. And so I think that constant desire to better self also is what makes me a man. So yeah, all of that together.
How do you find balancing all of those? Because some of those are not quote unquote traditional. Yet the last sort of bit at the end there was that, but I'm driven, which is obviously the more traditional role. So how do you find balancing those?
How do I find balance in all of those? I don't see them as mutually exclusive things. I think that for me, there's just a way of operating that enables all of those things to happen all at the same time. I suppose that's probably not a very good answer, but I've never found, for example, the ability to want to do better and to achieve. I never find that contrasts with being, having humility or being curious or having empathy. I think actually they are key components to making that work. I think if I am going to be better, whether that's doing better or being better, uh, I think those traits that I speak about are key to enabling that to happen. And actually, I don't think I would want to do it if they were missing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think they are key characteristics and traits of, I suppose, who I am. And actually, they assist with me doing better and being better. So I don't think, for me, I don't think it's a question of balance. I think it's a case of, if that is the thing for you also, what are those key traits that you want to incorporate for yourself to enable that to happen for you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, so the reason I ask is because a lot of sort of men's mental health is around, I guess, sort of almost holding on to traditional roles and this provider role, or being strong, or not wanting to cry, and all of these things. But deep down, I think a lot of men want to embrace these things as well, but they want to keep their core masculinity, shall we say. So it was just trying to get an understanding of that balance. But I think you may have answered it with the fact that you essentially were brought up around a myriad of women. Is the fairest way of putting that, is that was sort of there.
Yeah, and I think you raise a really good point is raised there with what you speak around masculinity, and it's something that I've written about. I speak to a lot of guys about. It's something I'm very passionate about. I think masculinity, if you think about it, is an umbrella term, and therefore what we are almost told is this is masculinity, and in order to be masculine, this is the thing that you do, or who you are, or how you act. I'm not sure I ascribe to that. I think there's a writer called J.J. Boller. He's a writer and an author, and he talks about this concept of a plurality of masculinities. So not just this one umbrella term, but actually this concept that masculinity needs to work for all of us as individuals. So almost creating this concept of what is your masculinity. So like you say, those traits that I've mentioned there, they aren't traditionally, or may not traditionally be associated with this concept of masculinity, but they're my masculine. They're traits that sit under my masculinity. And I think in doing that, not only does it enable you to find your own way of operating, your own sense of self as a man, I think it also is really helpful because it then means that you don't have to ascribe to this umbrella term, which maybe doesn't work for you. And I think that in terms of men's mental health is really, really important. It's working out like what works for you. And especially going back to your very first question around what makes you a man, I think that way of thinking, well, for me anyway, and for the guys that I'm working with, seems to really resonate. It's not, if you're not this, then you're not a man. It's actually, what's the man you want to be? Who is it that you want to be as a man? And I think for me, that's far more empowering than just trying to fit into this mold that somebody else somewhere has created.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently because obviously, but it's and I've sort of boiled it down to this, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on it. When you talk about being a man and what it means to be a man for you individually, I look at like the boundaries that you set and the way that you want to live. And I was listening to a few things, and what I've sort of come up with is, if you choose how you want to be as a man, and it is not necessarily archetypal, but you've created these things and you stick to that, you've actually got a level of self-respect. And I actually think mental health is having a good relationship with self and self-respect. So Absolutely. That's sort of where I'm currently at with being a man. If you're comfortable and you have self-respect and you maintain your boundaries, whatever they are, you can be happy in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it will. It's a lot of the time I talk about this kind of level of congruence that we have. So the alignment essentially of like mission, sense of self, values, beliefs, and it's interesting to talk about this because a lot of the time we don't necessarily either talk about this or think that these are the things that make us. Let me put it another way. I think a lot of times we focus on what I'll call lower level stuff. So where we work, what our job is, how much money we earn, where we earn that money, where we do the job, the skill sets we have, our capabilities, all of this lower level stuff. I think, if you imagine going to a party, one of the first questions that people ask you is, what do they do? Because they're trying to get a sense as to, who you are. But as we know, and we tend to do this a lot, there is a conflation between what we do and our sense of self, who we are. Nobody ever sits you down and says, tell me about your purpose in life, or what are your values, or what's your sense of self? I mean, yeah, okay, it may be a bit weird if you start a conversation like that. I don't know, maybe we should try it. But I think these are the things that we probably need to give more, not probably, we need to give more focus to. Because if we do work out, as you say, our sense of self, that respect for self, what our values are, and are they being fulfilled? What's that mission we have? What's our sense of purpose? What's that thing that drives us? That then filters down to those other levels that I spoke about before. But I think part of the problem is that we focus way too much on, how much money we're earning, the job that we got, the ladder that we're wanting to climb, the corporate ladder we're trying to climb. Most of the time, we don't even want to be climbing it, or for some people. So yeah, I think you're right. I think if we can get that congruence, especially in those areas of values, identity, purpose. I mean, one of the things I talk to people about is becoming a VIP, and it's a values, identity, purpose. What is your VIP? Yeah. Because I think, like I say, if we nail that, then our mental health is in a far better place.
Well, I think you found your purpose, right?
I believe I have. Yeah.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit about how you got there then.
Well, it's a story. So where do I begin? So for as long as I can remember, I always struggled with mental ill health. Always had a period, and this was essentially periods of depression. I can't remember a time when that wasn't the case. And part of that also relates to this constant bettering of self, right? I was always trying to understand as to why this was the case. So I'd done loads of things over the years. So I've been to therapy, been to counselling, and they'd all helped on various levels. And then back in 2012, I remember leaving a job. I was desperately unhappy, really depressed, ended up leaving a job without anything to go to. My choice. I just thought, I need to get away. I need a break. And I remember going home, sitting in the living room and looking out the window, and I thought, okay, what are you going to do? Because you don't have a job, but you have time. And I'd always thought about training and coaching. And so I had a look around and, what was out there, like courses I could do or what direction I could take. And I saw this free weekend for this thing called NLP. And I thought, I've heard of it. I don't really know what it is. And I went along and it was mind blowing. I just thought, God, this is the thing. I love this. And it was more to understand myself and my mindset, but also, as I say, with that, all that additional thinking of what am I going to do as a job going forward, and maybe as I say, training and coaching. Anyway, I signed up, I became a practitioner, and then what's called a master practitioner, and then a trainer. I always think master practitioner sounds so much cooler than trainer. Almost kind of tempted to stay at that level and wear a cape with, MP on the back. I didn't do that. but yeah, I became an NLP trainer. And then in terms of purpose, I then set up a business, and I took NLP training to my career. So I was a major donor fundraiser. So I set up an NLP training company for major donor fundraising teams. Worked with some of the largest charities in the UK. It was amazing. Was speaking, doing a lot of public speaking, talking at events, going into these organisations and helping their fundraisers better their communication skills, their mindset, to get the results with the major donors that they were working with. And then from that point, ended up working with another NLP trainer. We created another business, which was bringing NLP to the investment banking industry. What I have missed out chronologically just before the creation of that business is that I decided to I decided to move to Thailand at the beginning of 2019. And the idea was to, escape the rat race, go and live in paradise, online business, laptop on your lap, looking out the sea. What actually happened was I had a full-on breakdown. I'd literally flown halfway around the world and just decided to, and just found myself having this breakdown, like proper dark night of the soul kind of stuff. It was awful. I wasn't eating. I was isolated. I essentially just needed to get back home. And I remember coming home a few months later, and a few people were at the airport to meet me, and my mum just took one look at me and said, "Look," she could see straight away. She said, "You need to stay here for a while. You need to get better." And then instead of doing that, I did go home, but instead of really recognizing what was going on, I started this new business, as you do. And I think this is a real trait for some men, right? It's instead of recognizing what's happening, instead of showing that vulnerability, instead of actually saying, I need to focus on getting better and recognize really what's happening here, I'll just present to the world. I'll show that I'm still successful. I'll show that I can still do a thing because that's the thing that I'm meant to do. So that was at the end of 2019, started a new business. And then a few months later, COVID hit. So I was having a breakdown. I was trying to run a new business, and we were faced with a global pandemic with a business that was heavily dependent on being face-to-face with people. It was training and coaching. So I did that I probably lasted out there about a year and a half, 2 years before I then got to the end, and I thought I was slowly just, again, going downhill. I stepped away, took some time off, and then find myself now here today doing very long way of answering your question, but in terms of purpose, I think all of that has brought me to this place today where I'm sharing my story, hopefully a little bit more eloquently than I have just done there, in order to help other men feel like they can do the same within this context also of talking about your mental health. I think there is a real need to be more vulnerable, to be more comfortable, to almost not see it as a vulnerability, but to see it as a real strength, to put your hand up and say, do you know what? Things are not okay. I'm not okay. I need help. I need support. I need to change the way that I'm doing things. So yeah, my purpose, is, I think, to bring my story, to enable other men to share theirs, and to enable us to just be more comfortable, to say, I'm not okay.
Do you think your breakdown was because of the move and the escapism wasn't there? Or do you think it was that you'd given yourself the space to break down? You'd left corporate and gone to a place where there was space?
I think it came about, I think I was running away from stuff that I had to deal with. And I think one of those principal things was my relationship with my dad. My parents divorced when I was very young. My dad moved further and further away from me, got remarried, but essentially moved further and further away. recognized now through therapy that was just essentially complete abandonment. Or, I would have seen that as being abandoned as a kid. I think I was running away, and I think moving to this, paradise environment would have solved all that. But actually, what it did, probably created this space to break down, or maybe just reached a point. I think what I did was I reached a point where I recognised that my way of behaving up to that point was no longer sustainable. I was nearly 40, so I was 39 at that point. There was a lot of going out, drinking, doing stuff that wasn't wholesome for the soul, should we say. But almost, I think what that almost was this self-sabotage. It was not liking of self, and therefore destruction of self. Because if you don't like self, what does it matter if you destroy it? And I think, I got to that point where I was like, if you continue down this road, well, you can't continue down this road. And I think that was the break. It was like, you've got to take action, and you've got to start doing things differently. So maybe it was the space, and maybe the different place was the trigger to break down, to literally break down.
I'm just interested in it from what I'm finding is a lot of men go through these shifts in life, right? And it's these big breaks and these big pressures and these big changes that make them realize that their last 30, 40, 50 years have been not the way that they wanted to live them, and they swift and they change. And I think there's a lot of stuff in society that's probably missing. One being sort of an acceptance into manhood and sort of embracing it like a trial, if you will, not necessarily going into the woods, but I think that's lacking in modern day society, which has sort of allowed us to stay as young boys in men's bodies for a long period of time. So it was just an interest into seeing whether it was the space or whether it was you'd just had enough. But it seems
I think it was. I think it was just. I strongly believe that stuff happens for a reason, and I also think that on some level somewhere, whether it's spiritual or religious or biological, or whatever, I think just something had happened within me to go, enough. Change is needed, and and it was the most brutal kind of alert for that to happen, right? I mean, we're talking, like I say, dark night of the soul. The floor falls away from your feet, and you don't know who you are anymore. You don't know what you want. You don't know what you like. Yeah, I think it was something somewhere kicked in. And whilst, as I say, it was absolutely brutal, it was absolutely the thing I needed, and probably the best thing. I wouldn't say the best thing that's ever happened to me, but in terms of, course correcting onto a better path, then it was definitely that.
Yeah, it's so hard to decide whether it was a good thing, the break. A lot of men I speak to have said this was a good thing, I needed it, I needed this shift. But when you're there in that moment, it's hell on earth, as you've essentially put it, right? It's not
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely hell on earth. And I think it's also really important to, there was really dark periods where, I'm comfortable to share that, I absolutely had suicidal ideations, right? I remember walking around, I've got a little dog, and I remember walking around the woods, and I remember looking at the trees and thinking, I wonder which branch is strong enough to hold me up. That's really difficult to even now admit. But I'd got to a point where there was literally no hope. It was so dark. And I don't think my words can ever quite convey the situation. Like when I say, there was no hope, the concept is almost alien if you haven't been there yourself. But I remember, because you wake up and you think, I hope today is going to be okay, or I hope, I don't know, I don't argue with my partner, or I hope, there's always these little bits of hope. I had no hope. It was so dark. It was literally a case of, you just need to put one foot in front of the other at the moment. That's all you've got. And I could control that. But even that was difficult, because it's like, what's the point? If there's literally no hope, what's the point? So yeah, I think there's definitely, maybe it's not, we describe it as a good thing, but I think if you are that low, if it's been that dark and you can come back from that, there is something positive in there. And so, yeah, the work I do at the moment is, I hope guys never have to get to that point. I say to people, if you're not there, you're already ahead. Your starting point is not there. So we're almost winning where our starting point is. But yeah, I think to be in such a dark place, and as I say, to come back, then there has to be something good about that. There has to be something positive that you take forward.
You want to have tough things in life, right? But you don't want to have too tough of things. I think everything that I'm doing and everything that you're doing, and a lot of the people that I speak to in this space, want people to grab hold of that cliff, grab hold of that rope sooner. They don't want them to feel how they felt. But we know that going lower and lower, the story comeback story, the rising of the ashes, the phoenix, is better, right? But the sad truth is that not everyone comes back from the bottom. No. So we need to stop as many people as possible hitting the bottom. So yeah, the more we can do in and around before the bottom, the better, for sure.
Yeah.
What's NLP stand for?
So yeah, I get asked this all the time. I say to people, I'm an NLP trainer. They're like, cool, what's that? I say, oh, it stands for neuro-linguistic programming. And they go, cool, what's that? So the kind of official way of describing NLP, it stands for neuro-linguistic programming. So if we think about neuro being related to the mind, how we take in information through our five senses, the linguistic part then is how we label that. What's the meaning we put onto the sensory information that we are exposed to at any given moment? And then the programming element of it is how we put all of that together, how we sequence that stuff. So then we go and achieve the goals that we achieve or don't achieve, or we go and behave as we behave, or get the outcomes that we get or don't get. Another way of talking about NLP is it's the study of the structure of subjective experience. So how you do your world, how you put together your individual world. Because if you think about it, every day when we wake up, we are exposed to all of this sensory information, what we hear, what we see, what we feel, taste and smell. But what we see, hear and feel, we process that information, and then we have to make sense of it in order to create what in NLP we call our map of the world. And that map of the world then determines how we feel and how we behave. So I'll give you an example. Lewis, you and I could sit down and watch a film together, and at the end of it, I say, what do you reckon? You go, that was rubbish. I say, I actually thought it was quite good. We're watching the same film, but depending on what we see, what we hear, how it makes us feel, how we process that, ultimately then our outcome is, you think it's rubbish, I think it's good. If you extrapolate that out to the world, it's exactly the same thing. Every single day, all of us are going out there in this, we'll call it the territory, the world. But depending on how we process that sensory information that we're always constantly bombarded with, that will determine, as I say, how we then create our map of the world, how we internally represent that information to ourselves. And as I say, that then determines our state, or how we feel and how we behave. Now you might think, well, great, but actually all of that process is usually happening at a subconscious level. If I say to you, why did you think that film was rubbish? You might be able to give me a few kind of conscious reasons as to why, but there'll be so much also happening at an unconscious level that we aren't even aware of. There's things that we will generally, when we go about our daily lives, there's stuff we delete, what we distort, and what we generalize. And again, we probably aren't even consciously aware of this. But if you think about that process that happens, how we then internally represent the world to ourselves, if that then determines our behavior, if that's happening at a subconscious level, we aren't then even aware most of the time as to what's going on and therefore why we're not getting the outcomes that we want to achieve. So what NLP is about is really bringing that to a conscious level. I mean, it began back in the 70s. A couple of guys who were working in the area of behavioral change got together and they recognized that these two therapists were getting the most incredible results with their patients. And what these two guys said was, we want to learn how to do this. We basically are so fascinated by these two therapists and these amazing results that they're getting. We want to learn how they're getting it. And what they actually recognized was that they were using two different, they were using language in two very different ways. One was using very abstract and vague language. So one of the guys was called Milton Erickson that they were looking at. He's the father of hypnotherapy. And then another therapist was called Virginia Satir. She was using very direct, specific language to get the results with her clients. And essentially what these guys did was model the language that these guys were using and everything else that went with it. And essentially that's the basis of NLP. It's called modeling. So essentially the coding or the breaking down of excellence that you recognize in another person, so then you can try that on for yourself. So not copying what that person's doing, but essentially coding excellence and then trying that on for yourself. So the idea is that then you can do that excellence. So then what formed from there is this whole host of tools and techniques which can be used for a whole host of reasons, whether it's getting rid of limiting beliefs, gaining that sense of self, thinking about your mission or purpose. It can even be used to like give up smoking, cure phobias. There's a whole range of stuff that NLP is used for. And like I say, I started 12 years ago and it's enabled me to now build 3 businesses, find my purpose, really connect with that sense of self. And, along the way, help loads and loads of people, which I think is ultimately the best part of having initially stepped into that room on that weekend and thought, you know what, this is quite interesting. I think I'm going to become a trainer.
What would be the biggest thing that men want to overcome through NLP?
So I've just put together a new initiative and it looks at 6 specific areas, which I have created as like thematic areas we look at on the course based on the feedback from men. So the areas are mission. So for a lot of guys, especially around this age, so I'm 44, around this kind of middle age, it's mission and purpose. What is the thing they're doing? What do they want to do? They might have been in a career for the past 20 years and thought, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I hate this. But also I think at this stage of life, we start to think about this bigger kind of, what do I want to achieve? A sense of legacy as well. Another area is autonomy. So actually this sense of doing stuff for self. I think also for a lot of people, a lot of men at this age, they'll have a partner, they may have kids, there's stuff going on. They don't feel like they have that sense of autonomy and that ability to do stuff for self anymore. Another area is neurohacking. So this is all looking at mindset processes, like I was speaking about with the description of NLP. Understanding how we process information and how it affects our behavior. As I say, a lot of this happens at a subconscious level. We aren't even aware of it. So what we enable men to do is say, oh, this is how I'm thinking about this. This is actually why I'm not getting that outcome. This is why I'm behaving in this particular way. Oh, actually, I'm just seeing everything through this prism of fear. I worked with a guy a couple of weekends ago and took him through one of the techniques to release this level of inappropriate fear. I say inappropriate in the sense of it wasn't working for him. Just release this fear and it was transformational, and it's usually something that is created, from a very early age. And then the other areas we look at is transformation, so how do you want to change? What is the change you want to bring about for yourself? Respect. is another big area, both in terms of respect for self, but also respect for others that are in your world and how they also see you. And then the final area is agency. So again, very much related to that sense of autonomy. So this sense of operating from a position of cause rather than a position of being at the effect of stuff. So, it's almost like an equation. Are you operating from a space of empowerment through congruence in all those areas we spoke about before, purpose, identity, values, beliefs? Or do you find yourself constantly at the effect of everything else outside of you? The politics or the world or the price of petrol or, I don't know, your kids screaming. I don't know. There's a choice, again, which a lot of the time we aren't consciously aware of, is do you want to be operating from cause or do you want to be at the effect of everything happening outside of you? Because that's always going to be there, right? That stuff's always going to be there. But how do you then move to this position of cause in order to best deal with that stuff that's happening outside? So,
nice.
That's what we got.
It's blame is an interesting one, right? It's very easy to blame other things for what's happening.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I've always been I feel like I've always been pretty responsible in the sense that I will always take blame. I mean, I'm not perfect. Maybe I take it too much. That might be my Achilles heel. Like I always say it's my fault no matter what happened. But it's interesting how many men do sit in that sort of sphere, like, oh, the Labour's in power, my business is not going to work anymore, etc., etc. And then the other side of that is the mission side, which is men used to buy Porsches, now they want to find their purpose. Why do you think that shift has happened?
As in, why they've gone from buying Porsches to finding their purpose?
Yeah, it's like a midlife crisis, right? You want to find what you're doing.
Yeah, so I use the term midlife crisis, right? But I don't particularly like it because of the connotations associated with it. Like you say, midlife crisis usually sleeping with somebody younger, buying tighter clothes, buying a sports car. I don't think these connotations are helpful because I think midlife crisis is so much more than that. They may be some of the ways it manifests, but I think what we tend to look at, therefore, is the symptoms versus the cause. They're all symptoms of something happening, and it's easy then to look at them and laugh and point. I think that in itself then stops us from recognizing midlife crisis as actually something much deeper, which is related to the stuff that we spoke about earlier, right? There's a reason why suicide's the biggest killer of men under 50. I think it's reasons, it's like this, right? So I think men may want to still go and buy a Porsche, right? Yeah, but I think that's a symptom of wanting to find their purpose. I think they may still want to go and buy tighter clothes or sleep with somebody younger. I think that's a symptom of not being congruent and not knowing their purpose, for example. So I think all these things may still happen, but I think ultimately they're not the answer. They're just maybe quick fixes or things to make you feel a bit better for a temporary period of time. I think what I'm talking about is let's look at the cause of the reason why they're happening. And those causes may be disconnect from mission. It's you haven't got a sense of self. You don't feel like you know what you're doing. You are operating from a position of fear. So I think maybe awareness. I think we've probably become more aware of they are symptoms, and actually it points more than it looking at the cause. I think there's probably more awareness now of personal development, men's health. It's more acceptable now to look at that thing as a man, purpose and self-development and sorting self out. So yeah, probably awareness. But as I say, I think the key thing there is they are all symptoms, and actually that's not I don't think that's where our focus should be. I think our focus is at the cause? What's making men want to go and do that kind of stuff? And I think that's where we focus.
Yeah, it's again, I'm not against men buying Porsches. I think having goals and that's what you want, amazing. But it's just cliche, I guess. But things have changed. There's a great book, I forget the author, but it's called Second Peak, and it's about obviously once you've achieved in career or climbed that corporate ladder and realized it wasn't actually for you, even though you were told what to do. It's about basically going back to the bottom of a new peak and starting to build up from there, really, which is an interesting way of looking at it. And I think someone was interviewing Denzel Washington recently, and he basically said they asked him about like his purpose now that he's multi-Oscar winning, etc., etc. And he said, first you learn, then you earn, then you return, which I thought was really nice way of sort of summarizing life as a man, I guess, because he is a man.
Yeah,
it was a nice one for sure. Paul, in the men's space as a whole, what are you seeing that you think is doing well, or what do you want to see more of?
I think the thing that is going well is I think there are more men talking about mental health. So I think this one actually is both of those things. I think we are seeing more men talk about mental health, and I know how well that's being received just from my own stuff. So I post every day on LinkedIn. I'm very open and candid about my mental health journey, and the feedback that I'm constantly getting is, amazing. Got either guys reacting to the posts or messaging me directly. There's it's really cutting through having men being open and vulnerable and talking about their mental health. So I think alongside myself and other men who are out there, making this a thing, and yourself, making this a thing, I think alongside that, we need more of that. We need more men to be talking about their mental health. I think there's more. I think what might also work, or we want to see more of, is it more of like an ability to be humble, to have that humility, to be in the service of others. I think a lot of male identity is still driven by achievement and advancement and money and how big is your house or how big is your car or what have you done. I think there needs to almost be the kind of review of, some kind of review of that. And, I think that drives the problem. If you are not doing or getting or having these things, then are you really a man kind of question. And I think that needs reviewing at every level. Yeah. Starting with stuff like this, or as posting on it. I think we are able to show that there's other ways to just be, and not just not doing and achieving. And I think one of the things as well, I think it's related to that. I think for a lot of men, they feel this real need to, as an individual, to achieve and to show they're achieving and being successful. I think at the moment, with the world as it is, I would say there is a real need from men to be less individual focused, so less self-focused and more community, recognizing how our strengths and abilities as men can not just enable ourselves to be well, as alongside doing well for self, but for others as well. Especially at the moment, it feels like there's a real individualist, thing going on at the moment. And I think what the world needs is more, community-based action and thinking.
I think we're at a weird crossroads where a man can be anything, but still has that pressure. This still needs to do it all. So needs to be emotionally secure, but also still needs to be earning six figures and climbing the corporate ladder and being an amazing dad and doing this and doing that. We've not got to the point where it's this or this, not you still have to do everything. You don't have to achieve everything. It's not more on your plate. And I think that's, to summarize what you've said, that seems to be sort of where you want men to be.
Yeah. And I think, do you know what, there is an unsolved equation, right, about what it is to be man or a good man, right? So I remember reading an article recently about Andrew Tate, and they were saying that the reason Andrew Tate is so popular is because he dares to define masculinity. Now, I think his stuff's abhorrent. I think the stuff he puts out is misogyny masquerading as masculinity. But I think he's so attractive to guys because he dares to put his hand. He's almost countercultural. He dares to put his hand up and says, "This is what it is to be a man." Now, I fervently disagree with that. But the problem we have is nobody on the other side is coming up with a specific, tangible, accessible answer, which is the opposite to that. So that this is man. This is a good man. And I think until we can articulate that and put that out there as somebody to go, oh, okay, no, I don't want that one. This is the thing. I think until we do that, we find ourselves in this, what is it to be a man? And unfortunately, a lot of guys are going to be attracted to somebody who's over there waving, saying, this is the way. If only because it's, just explaining it, just giving a definition in itself is attractive, right? So I get it. I get why that's happening. But as I say, I fervently disagree with it.
Yeah, it's tough because you and I are essentially saying you can be anything you want to be, but he has just simply said, this is it. And people are drawn to certainty, right? I guess, which, yeah.
It must be. I don't know the psychology behind it, but yeah, absolutely. I think if somebody tells you this is what X is, and X in this case is man, there is an attraction just on a level of knowing, going, oh, that's what that is. I was talking to my therapist yesterday, and he said, inherently, we're very lazy as human beings. We will look for something, find something, and go almost subconsciously tick it off. Then, okay, now I know what that is. I can tick it off and move on, because there's so many other stuff around us that we are, distracted by or trying to do or trying to achieve. So I can imagine if somebody goes, this is what a man is, you go, and on some level the brain will go, okay, so that's sorted. It's, I don't have the answer. I don't have the other side, but what I'm going to do my best to is continue to work with as many men, and we hopefully maybe try and come up with an answer.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty solid plan. Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. If people have loved what they've heard and want to find out more, where is the best place to find you, and let them know about anything that you've got coming up?
Yeah, so we are currently having a website rebuilt. So unfortunately, I can't direct people to that. But if you are on LinkedIn, please go there. My name's Paul Cartwright. I think my handle is Paul Cartwright Mantra. I'd love to connect with you on there, and please feel free to drop me a message. And if you want to chat about anything that you've heard today, I'd be delighted to.